Notorious Underworld figure Gavin "Capable" Preston has been shot dead outside a Keilor café.
Up to 10 shots shatter the silence. On the ground outside Sweet Lulu's cafe, Gavin "Capable" Preston was clinging to life. Shot in the head but still breathing before one of Melbourne's most notorious gangland figures was ultimately silenced.
When Gavin "Capable" Preston, a well-known Melbourne gangster, got out of prison in April 2023 after serving 11 years for killing a drug dealer, the criminal world and Victorian police were on edge. Preston had previously been connected to the shooting of ex-Bandido biker Toby Mitchell and was involved in a plan to kill Melbourne crime boss Mick Gatto. His release came with strict conditions. Preston had just finished serving time for shooting ice dealer Adam Curri in a North Melbourne apartment back in February 2012. But only 6 months after his release, in broad daylight, Preston was brutally gunned down. He was shot 10 times while having a meal outside a busy cafe called Sweet Lulu's in Melbourne's Keilor village on a Saturday, September 9th. One of Melbourne's most unpredictable and dangerous criminals was dead, taken out in a storm of bullets in front of shocked onlookers. As the Victorian police scrambled to catch the killers and figure out the reasons behind the hit, they knew they had to act fast to prevent the situation from spiraling into more gang violence. Gavin Preston was born on the Sunshine Coast, but grew up in Melbourne's western suburbs. Even though he came from a stable family, his teenage years were spent in and out of juvenile detention for violent acts. By the time he turned 18, he already had a long criminal record with charges like armed robbery, assault, and carrying weapons. In the early 90s, as a young adult, Preston's time behind bars kept growing. His first big conviction was for assaulting a shopkeeper, Philip Stiles, in Northcote in 1991. Not long after, he was locked up again for viciously beating up a football fan, Greg Wilson, with a stick, just because Wilson looked at him the wrong way. While in prison, Preston didn't back down from trouble. He was involved in several brutal fights with other inmates, often landing him extra time in solitary confinement. During his stays in Pentridge Prison, one of Melbourne's toughest, Preston's circle of allies included notorious figures like Matthew the General Johnson, who had killed drug lord Carl Williams. Despite being released on license in the mid-90s, Preston couldn't leave his criminal ways behind. He became an accomplice in an armed bank robbery in St. Albans, where he terrorized the staff and customers with a .22 pistol, making off with $24,000 in a stolen car. Preston often blamed his violent behavior on the system, claiming that his life of crime was a result of his constant imprisonment. While in prison, Preston continued his violent streak. In one shocking incident, he and Matthew Johnson, armed with knives and a pickaxe, put a prison guard through a terrifying experience. They attempted to break through reinforced glass to attack a rival inmate, but the guard managed to lock the target in a cell just as armed officers arrived, saving the inmate's life. When Preston was released in 2007, he tried to turn his life around, but it wasn't long before he fell back into his old ways. After the devastating loss of his brother Richard to a heroin overdose in 2011, Preston, now marked with commando-style tattoos, returned to his violent roots. In February 2012, Adam Curri became another victim of Preston's brutal ways, paying the ultimate price for being in his path. Adam Curri was one of Victoria's top ice dealers and a close partner of amphetamine kingpin John Higgs. In the months before Curri's murder, Gavin Preston was already under police surveillance, suspected of shooting biker boss Toby Mitchell on November 28, 2011, outside the Bandido's clubhouse. Mitchell, the leader of the gang's Australian chapter, was hit in the stomach, back, and hip, but despite losing a kidney, he survived. True to the code of the streets, Mitchell refused to cooperate with the police. Just 3 days after the attempted hit, Preston and infamous Underworld figure Nabil Mad Lebo Magni were arrested after leading police on a high-speed chase through Melbourne's CBD. They drove the wrong way up the busy Collins Street tramline, with police later finding an unregistered firearm, blood-stained clothing, and a curious floor plan for a gym opposite the Bandido's headquarters. Although there was no DNA linking Preston to Mitchell's shooting, authorities suspected they had accidentally thwarted an imminent hit on Mick Gatto, a powerful figure in Australia's organized crime scene. Preston had been previously investigated for attempting to extort money from Gatto's construction company. Despite police objections, Preston was granted bail and released on December 22, 2011. Following his release, Victorian police launched Operation Encryption, which involved putting Preston under close surveillance and tapping his phone, hoping to catch him before he could strike again. On the night Adam Curri was killed, Victorian police stopped monitoring Gavin Preston just 30 minutes before he executed Curri at a Canning Street apartment. The police surveillance team, nicknamed the Dogs, left at 12:25 a.m. Preston had arrived at Curri's busy apartment in a Holden Commodore around 10:40 p.m. There was some heated back and forth between the two outside, while inside, there were others present, people known to the police and drug users stopping by to buy drugs. By 11:57 p.m., Curri and Preston were alone. Moments later, Curri was dead, shot twice in the head. A separate surveillance camera, which had been monitoring Curri's house due to his involvement in the methamphetamine trade, captured footage of Preston, hooded and wearing gloves, leaving the property at 12:54 a.m., just minutes before a neighbor called emergency services, reporting loud screams from the apartment. Preston was arrested the next day and charged with murder. He was held on remand at Barwon, Victoria's maximum security prison. During his 9-day murder trial in May 2015, stunning details emerged. Preston pleaded guilty to defensive homicide after prosecutors accepted his claim that Curri had pulled a gun on him and the fatal shooting occurred during a struggle. It was also revealed that Preston had been in regular contact with Curri in the days leading up to the incident. He believed Curri was planning to rat him out for a crime and was trying to collect a $2,500 drug debt from him at the time. Preston claimed that he went to Adam Curri's flat to try and broker peace between himself and notorious criminal Christopher Badness Bince, a close ally of Toby Mitchell. Preston, paranoid and on edge, believed Bince was plotting to blow up his car in retaliation for Mitchell's shooting. Following the attack on Curri, Bince reportedly took things further, attaching a tracking device to Preston's car and even stalking Preston's partner. It later came out that Bince had entrusted Curri with explosives meant for a car bomb while Bince was out of the state. This added another layer of tension to the already dangerous situation. On August 11, 2015, Preston was sentenced to 11 years in prison for the murder. Before being led to the dock for sentencing, he couldn't resist taunting a detective from the Piranha Task Force who was sitting in the courtroom. Preston smirked and said, "I reckon you've lost this one, champ. What did you tell everyone? You've never lost a case." With a smug grin, he added that he'd be out of jail before the detective retired. Despite his cocky attitude, Preston was a marked man behind bars. His violent history and dangerous connections meant that life in prison was far from safe. Gavin Preston was one of the founding members of Prisoners of War, a notorious gang created to target anyone who cooperated with police. However, in a cruel twist, the gang he helped form turned on him during his prison stint for the Adam Curri killing. In 2014, Preston was ambushed and brutally stabbed 9 times in a video-recorded assault by 5 gang members who used knives, spikes, and blades. The attack left Preston with multiple slashes to his face, neck, and a deep 15 centimeters cut along his jawline. Ironically, just moments before the violent attack, Preston and his attackers had shared a brotherly exchange, hugging and shaking hands in the prison yard. As Preston served the remainder of his sentence, his troubles only escalated. He found himself in the crosshairs of George Marogi, a feared drug baron, murderer, and fellow inmate at Barwon Prison. Marogi harbored deep resentment toward Preston, having already botched an earlier attempt to kill Preston's ally, Nabil Mad Lebo Magnis, who was later gunned down in January 2020 while sleeping in his car. Fueled by the loss of his close friend, Marogi's hatred for Preston only grew. Nabil Mad Lebo Magni had supposedly threatened not just to beat up, but also to rape Jesse Marogi, the younger brother of George Marogi. George was serving a hefty 32-year sentence for the brutal murder of Kadir Ors, who went by the nickname Cross. Furious about the threats against his brother, George lived up to his nickname, reportedly putting a $1 million bounty on Preston's head to put an end to the ongoing feud. On a peaceful spring Saturday morning, while Preston enjoyed a glass of orange juice outside Sweet Lulu's café in Melbourne's Keilor East, he faced his final reckoning. In a hail of bullets, his colorful and tumultuous life came to a violent end. But who was really behind Preston's death? Rumors swirling in the underworld suggested that he was targeted by members of the Comanchero Club because he refused to remove a large, visible tattoo of the club from his head. But would the gang really go as far as to kill a former associate over a perceived slight? In the months leading up to his public execution, Preston was tangled up in all sorts of shady dealings. There were mysterious arson attacks hitting several tobacco stores in Melbourne, and Preston's name kept coming up in connection with those incidents. At the same time, a sinister plot emerged involving an attempt to steal the body of George Morogi's brother, which marked Preston as a target. Compounding the chaos, George Morogi's sister died unexpectedly at the age of 30 after contracting COVID-19. In a bizarre twist, two masked intruders wearing gas masks entered a Melbourne mausoleum and attempted to exhume the body. While their plot failed, they did manage to steal a $100,000 ring from the corpse. If their intention was to extort or punish Morogi for his rivalry with Preston, they definitely stirred the pot. Ultimately, it seemed like multiple figures from the underworld wanted Preston dead. However, it was rumored that tensions really boiled over due to Preston's alleged theft of trucks from the Morogi family's transport business, pushing the situation to its breaking point. In the eyes of Preston's executioners, he was marked as a dead man walking, not because of his violent reputation, but because he was running out of friends willing to back him up. His brunch with Abbas Mania Jr., Nabil's son, turned out to be his last meal. On Old Calder Highway at 10:20 a.m. on September 9th, two gunmen opened fire while Preston sat at a table on the sidewalk. Abbas Jr. managed to escape, suffering wounds to his stomach and upper body while chaos erupted around them. Preston collapsed, riddled with bullets, and the attackers fled the scene. Though the gangster bled out on the ground, the attackers made a series of blunders. They escaped in an Audi Q5 and drove to Blair Court at the corner of King Solomon Park, where they attempted to set the vehicle on fire to destroy any DNA evidence. In the process, one of the assailants burned his hand. They then switched vehicles to a black Volkswagen Polo, which was later found abandoned 3 kilometers away in Cottis Place. Thankfully, a quick-thinking resident doused the blazing Audi with a garden hose, providing the police with a goldmine of evidence. Detectives soon found witnesses who reported seeing 2 men dressed entirely in black, trying to torch the car and removing 2 backpacks from it. Task force detectives got to work, trying to figure out if Preston had been double-crossed by someone close to him. Adding a twist to the drama, Sabrine Magni, the daughter of Nabil Mad Lebo Magni and sister to Abbas, was dating Jesse Morogi, George's son. Despite the bitter rivalry between their families, the unlikely couple openly flaunted their relationship on social media, raising eyebrows all around. Given Jesse's motive and the ample opportunity he had to carry out an assassination, the pieces of this dangerous puzzle started to fit together. Sabrine and Preston had met at the Crown Casino Resort in Melbourne to try to clear the air between them. But was it really believable that Jesse would order a hit on Preston while he was out enjoying a meal with his girlfriend's brother? The police were also keen to investigate whether Abbas Jr. had lured Preston into a false sense of security. Sure, he had taken a flesh wound in the attack, but could Abbas Jr. really have orchestrated Preston's murder? Just days after the shooting, rumors began to circulate, and it quickly became apparent that a Sydney connection was looming large in the execution. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that there were deeper ties and motives at play, suggesting that Preston's violent end was not just a random act of gang warfare, but part of a larger, more complicated web of betrayal and revenge. 46 days after the attack, on Wednesday, October 23rd, 2023, police made their move, arresting Sydney tradie Jaden Tito in a dawn raid at his home in Bradbury. Heavily armed tactical units swooped in to take one of the alleged gunmen as authorities worked to piece together the origins of the hit. Once a promising NRL star, Tito was extradited to Melbourne to appear at Crown Court on October 26th. Detective Superintendent Janet Stevenson stated that Tito was a key player in the shooting, but also noted that police were still on the hunt for several others, and the exact motive behind the shooting was still a mystery. In November 2023, Rabi Zahab, a Yaguna native, was also questioned by the Victorian Crime Command while he was at Long Bay Prison in Sydney. Zahab was awaiting sentencing for unrelated drug supply and weapons charges. Although he has not been formally charged in connection with Preston's death, Police indicated that he remains a person of interest. Jaden Tito was held in custody as the investigation continued. Meanwhile, Gavin Preston was laid to rest at Altona Memorial Park in Melbourne's west. His burial site features a gold plaque engraved with his nickname, Gavin Capable Preston. Below it, a small wooden plaque reads the phrase, "It is what it is," marking the end of the road for one of Melbourne's most infamous mobsters.